Daniel Boone, explorer of Kentucky, embodiment of the American pioneer. Introduction: The footsteps of a pioneer. Close your eyes for a moment. Imagine yourself standing in the midst of an unknown, vast land, stretching endlessly before you. A place where forests stretch all the way to the horizon, where the wind howls over the rugged mountain peaks, a land untouched by the footprints of man. No map, no trail, no light to guide you through the darkness of the night. It's only you and the mighty wilderness, both beckoning and threatening at the same time. The 18th century. America was merely a narrow strip of land along the Atlantic coast. To the west lay the towering Appalachian Mountains, an impassable wall blocking man's access to what lay beyond. Beyond that mountain range, the legendary forests of Kentucky stretched far and wide, a land whispered about in rumors, with stories of vast herds of deer, lush meadows, and fertile lands untouched by human hands. But the path to this land was fraught with peril. Wild beasts lurking in the shadows. Native tribes fiercely guarding their sacred grounds. Disease, hunger, storms, and above all, the fear of the unknown, a fear that had made many dreamers falter and fall. In an era when most people clung to the safety of small settlements, one man heard the call of the wilderness. A man who refused to live an ordinary life. A man who believed that freedom wasn't just a concept in books, it was a fight for survival, to conquer nature and the fears within himself. His name was Daniel Boone. No crown, no mighty army, no treasure, only calloused hands, piercing eyes, and a heart that would never yield. Daniel Boone didn't just open the gateway to Kentucky. He opened a new path for all of America, a path for pioneers, those who refused to accept their fate, those who were willing to gamble everything to seek freedom. So, what made Daniel Boone the great man he became? What pushed him to abandon the comforts of a safe life and venture into a wilderness where he might never return? What transformed Boone into a living symbol of the pioneering spirit of America? Let's rewind the clock. Let's walk with Daniel Boone through the dense, shadowy forests, through cold, rainy nights, through life and death struggles, to understand, to feel, and to marvel at the strength of a man small in stature yet mighty in the face of the vast wilderness. This journey is not just about the land of Kentucky. It's the story of dreams, of courage, and of becoming the pioneer of your own fate. If you believe that within each of us lies a pioneer waiting to be awakened, hit the like button, subscribe, and share this video so that spirit can continue to spread. Chapter 1: Early Years and the Seed of Freedom. In 1734, on a chilly autumn day, in a small farm nestled among the vast forests of Pennsylvania, a child was born with a cry that echoed through the wilderness. This child was named Daniel Boone. the man who would later become a legend, embodying the spirit of the American pioneer. The Boone family were immigrants from England, with a deep thirst for freedom and a love for adventure. Their farm was located on the frontier, a place where small settlements were always on the brink of being swallowed by the untamed wilderness. From the moment he was born, Daniel grew up surrounded by the sounds of the roaring winds, the growls of wolves, and the distant whispers of mythical stories told by his parents around the fire. Even as a young boy, Daniel stood out from the other children. While they sought the safety of their mother's arms, Daniel was irresistibly drawn to the deep, dark woods beyond. Each time he accompanied his father on hunting trips, he observed keenly, memorizing every trace on the ground, every rustling leaf, and every gust of wind. Nature didn't frighten him, on the contrary, it beckoned, whispering promises of boundless freedom. When Daniel turned 10, he was allowed to venture into the forest on his own for the first time. With a crude bow that he had crafted himself, Daniel stealthily followed the tracks of a deer. His heart raced with excitement and apprehension. The vast forest seemed to swallow his small frame, but Daniel did not retreat. He weaved through the thick bushes, crossed cold, rushing streams, stumbled and rose again. Finally, he spotted a rabbit grazing. Daniel drew his bow, hands trembling with nervous anticipation. The arrow flew and hit its target. The rabbit collapsed, and for the first time, Daniel felt a rush of pride, not just for the small victory, but because for the first time he felt accepted by nature as a part of it. In the years that followed, Daniel spent more and more time roaming the forests. He learned to follow animal tracks, read the direction of the wind, find fresh water, and identify edible plants and medicinal herbs. No one taught Daniel. Nature itself became his first teacher. By the time he was 15, Daniel had earned a reputation in his small community as a skilled hunter. The adults marveled at his abilities, while his peers admired and envied him. But Daniel didn't care for praise. Each journey into the wild, each night spent camping in the depths of the forest, each morning waking under the whispering canopy of trees was the true reward for him. On many nights, Daniel sat by his small campfire, gazing at the twinkling stars against the black sky. He wondered, beyond the rolling mountains, what lands awaited. Lands untouched by any human, where he could live freely, unbound by laws or boundaries. From a very young age, a fire had begun to burn within Daniel Boone's heart. It wasn't just a love for nature. It was a burning desire to break free from the constraints of a predetermined life. While others sought safety, Daniel sought the unknown. While others built fences to protect themselves, Daniel dreamed of boundless meadows. It was during these formative years in the wilderness that Daniel was shaped into something extraordinary, tough, resilient, independent, and brimming with a thirst for freedom. These qualities would later carry him through the harshest of challenges and help him write the immortal story of Kentucky. But that was just the beginning. The real adventures were still ahead, waiting for Daniel beyond the horizon, where only the hearts that know no fear would dare to tread. Chapter 2: The Formative Years, When the Call of Aspiration Beckoned. Daniel Boone's teenage years passed like a quiet stream winding through the old forest, subtle yet powerful. When Daniel turned 17, the world around him began to shift. The conflicts between European powers in America grew increasingly tense, ushering in a tumultuous period known as the French and Indian War. The Boone family, like many settler families, found themselves caught up in the whirlwind of war. When the colonial army called for volunteers to defend the land against invasions, Daniel didn't hesitate. With his marksmanship and knowledge of the rugged terrain, young Daniel quickly became a valuable member of the militia. Daniel's first battle took place during the Braddock Campaign, a disaster for the British and colonial forces. The British Army, accustomed to fighting in strict formations, was ambushed by the French and their Native American allies deep in the woods. Blood spilled, men fell, and the sounds of screams echoed through the dark forest. It was the first time Daniel witnessed the fragility of life in the face of death. But in the midst of the chaos, Daniel discovered a simple truth: survival skills not only saved his life, but also the lives of others. In the turmoil, Daniel used his instincts to lead a group of soldiers out of the ambush, slipping through hidden paths that only someone familiar with the forest would know. After the Braddock Campaign, Daniel returned home with a soul much older than his years. He was no longer the curious boy chasing deer tracks in the forest. Now, Daniel understood that the freedom he had always dreamed of came at a price, in sweat, tears, and sometimes blood. Soon after, Daniel met and fell in love with Rebecca Bryan, a woman with eyes as clear as a spring and a spirit as strong as the men of the frontier. Rebecca was not only beautiful, but also someone who deeply understood the harsh life of the wilderness. They married, built a small family, and Daniel began to shoulder the responsibilities of a husband and father. But despite his attempts to live a quiet, domestic life, the fire of aspiration within Daniel never dimmed. Each night, after long hours of hard work, when Rebecca and the children were fast asleep, Daniel would quietly gaze toward the west, where the Appalachian Mountains rose under the silver moonlight. He knew that beyond those mountains lay a world that his heart longed for. By the 1760s, rumors began to spread about a fertile land called Kentucky. People spoke of vast, green meadows, endless herds of deer, and crystal-clear streams. But there were also tales of dangers: wild beasts, Native American warriors, and untamed land. To Daniel, Kentucky wasn't just a promised land, it symbolized freedom, an opportunity to live the life he had always dreamed of. Soon after, Daniel decided to embark on an expedition. He gathered a small group of the bravest men, prepared necessary supplies, and in the fall of 1767, they quietly left the settlements and headed west. The first expedition ended in failure. The dense forests, towering mountains, and rushing streams seemed to conspire against them. Some men gave up. Others were injured or went missing in the deep woods. Daniel and the remaining men had no choice but to return home in disappointment. But this failure couldn't extinguish Daniel's spirit. On the contrary, it made him more determined. He spent the following years preparing, learning from his mistakes, and seeking out information from other hunters and explorers. Daniel knew that in order to open the gateway to Kentucky, he would need not only physical strength but also a resolve that would never falter. In 1769, after years of preparation, Daniel Boone decided to set out once more. This time, he swore to himself there would be no turning back. There would be no stopping midway. There would be no unfinished dreams. This journey would change Daniel's life, and it would change the fate of America. Chapter 3: Conquering the Promised Land of Kentucky. In the spring of 1769, on a quiet morning when the mist still clung to the treetops, Daniel Boone silently tied the last bundle of supplies onto his horse. He looked out towards the horizon, where the distant mountains seemed to beckon. Beside him was his group of companions, John Stewart, Felix Walker, and a few experienced hunters. They all knew they were stepping into an adventure with no turning back. This journey required not only strength but also the courage of those born to face uncertainty. They crossed vast forests, forded fast-moving rivers, braved unexpected storms, and confronted wild animals lurking in the shadows. With each step westward, they seemed to enter a world unlike any other, wild, mysterious, and filled with uncharted territory. After weeks of trekking through the forest and wading through streams, Daniel and his companions finally arrived at Cumberland Gap, a narrow passage between the Appalachian Mountains, a doorway to a new land. Standing before Cumberland Gap, Daniel felt his heart race. He knew that beyond this gap lay Kentucky, the land he had long dreamed of. Crossing the gap was no easy feat. The steep cliffs, hidden streams, and dense thickets seemed to conspire to prevent their passage. But with unwavering determination, they slowly made their way, inching forward with each step. When they finally reached the other side, a sight unlike any they had ever seen lay before them. Vast green valleys stretching endlessly, herds of deer grazing peacefully, and crystal-clear streams winding like silver ribbons through the lush forest. Daniel Boone stood speechless. He thought to himself, "This is a paradise for those who love freedom. A land no one owns. A new beginning for dreams yet to be realized." But this paradise was also fraught with dangers. The native tribes, like the Shawnee and Cherokee, considered Kentucky their sacred hunting ground. The indigenous people did not welcome the presence of white settlers. They saw them as invaders. Just a few days after setting up camp to hunt and explore, Daniel's group was attacked. One night, when the faint moonlight filtered through the trees, arrows shot out from the darkness. The agonizing screams tore through the night. John Stewart, Daniel's close friend, was struck by an arrow and fell to the ground. His blood stained the red earth of Kentucky. With his survival instincts kicking in, Daniel immediately signaled for the group to retreat. They ran through the dense forest, swam across streams, and hid in thick bushes. The next morning, when the sun rose high, only Daniel and a few survivors remained. The loss was painful, but Daniel refused to let himself break. He swore to himself, "I will not leave Kentucky. Even if I have to face danger, even if I must pay with blood, I will claim this land." In the months that followed, Daniel Boone wandered alone through the heart of Kentucky. He lived as a native, hunting, fishing, building shelters under tree roots, and tracking migrating animals to find food. Each morning when he awoke, Daniel saw the sunlight filtering through the leaves, heard the gentle babble of the streams, and smelled the earthy fragrance of the damp soil. He felt as though he had become part of this land, not an invader, but a child of nature. His solitary days also sharpened his senses. He learned to read animal tracks in the dirt, to listen to the wind to predict storms, and to understand the signs whispered by the forest and mountains. Occasionally, Daniel encountered other hunters, both native and white. Sometimes they traded food, other times they silently watched each other from a distance, speaking through the silent language of caution. Then, an unexpected event occurred. Daniel was captured by a group of Shawnee warriors. They stripped him of his weapons, took all the furs and provisions he had gathered over the months. Their leader looked Daniel in the eye and declared, "This is not your land. If you return, death will find you." Daniel was released after promising to leave Kentucky. But when he regained his freedom, instead of returning home as promised, Daniel followed other trails and continued his exploration. He silently told himself, "They can take everything from me, my bow, my furs, my food. But they cannot take the dream in my heart." By the end of 1771, after 2 years of wandering through the green forest, Daniel Boone returned to North Carolina. He was gaunt and worn, his clothes ragged like a leaf at the end of autumn. But his eyes were bright, eyes of someone who had seen the promised land with his own feet and heart. Daniel began to tell others about Kentucky, about the endless fields, the abundant herds of animals, the streams full of fish. He inspired the men and women around him. He planted the seeds of hope for a future that was freer and more expansive. Daniel Boone knew that one day he would lead his family, friends, and other pioneers to settle in Kentucky. That land would no longer be just a dream. It would become a reality. Chapter 4. The Fight for Kentucky. In 1773, Daniel Boone decided to make his dream a reality. He was no longer alone. This time, by his side was his wife, Rebecca Boone, and their 8 young children, along with many other pioneering families. They formed a makeshift convoy, carrying supplies, tools, livestock, and burning desires for a new life. The journey to Kentucky began on a cool autumn day. The long line of people stretched like a small stream through the vast wilderness, following narrow, treacherous paths, crossing rolling hills. The sounds of horses' hooves, wheels creaking on rocky ground, the cheerful chatter of children, all blended together to create a symphony full of life. Daniel Boone led the way, his eyes never leaving the tracks in the soil, his ears attuned to every unusual sound in the forest. He knew that at any moment, danger could strike. And then the first tragedy occurred. One evening, as the group set up camp by a stream, loud shouts rang out from the dark forest. A group of Shawnee warriors sprang from the shadows like ghosts. Gunshots echoed through the air. Shouts, children's screams, the whinny of panicked horses filled the night. In the chaos, James Boone, Daniel's eldest son, only 17 years old, was surrounded. The young boy fought with all his youthful strength. But in the end, James fell, his blood staining the Kentucky earth. Daniel rushed to him, his heart breaking. He cradled his son in his arms, his eyes burning with pain and fury. In that moment, Daniel understood. The road to freedom was not paved with rose petals. It was paved with blood, tears, and sacrifice. The tragic event left the group in turmoil. Many families, scared, turned back toward the east. But Daniel, despite the overwhelming grief, remained determined to stay. He whispered to those who stayed, "If we give up now, the dream of freedom will die with these drops of blood." They decided to press on. To advance deeper into Kentucky, Daniel knew they needed a road, a trail wide enough for wagons and the moving group. And so, in 1775, Daniel Boone took on the task of leading the construction of a path through the Cumberland Gap, known as the Wilderness Road. Day after day, Daniel and his team chopped down trees, cleared dense underbrush, and filled in swampy ground. Rough hands, bleeding feet. The sound of axes striking tree trunks echoed through the wilderness like the drums of warriors. Every turn of the road was a small battle, fighting wild animals, bandits, torrential rains, and sudden ambushes from hostile tribes. But Daniel never backed down. Whenever he grew weary, he reminded himself, "This is not just a road through the forest. This is the road to freedom, the road to a new future for a whole nation. Finally, in the spring of 1775, after so many hardships, the Wilderness Road was completed. Daniel led the first families down the road and into the heart of Kentucky. Immediately, they began building a fort, Boonesborough, named after Daniel Boone, as an eternal symbol of courage. Boonesborough was not just a simple wooden fort. It was the hope of hundreds of families. It was a declaration: we will stay. We will defend this land with everything we have. But peace did not come easily. Before long, local tribes, encouraged by the British during the American Revolution, began launching fierce sieges. Boonesborough became a battlefield. The sounds of gunfire echoed day and night, arrows filled the sky, and waves of attacks came like crashing tides. Daniel Boone, with his natural leadership skills and indomitable courage, led the settlers of Boonesborough in defiance. He stood on the fort's walls, eyes blazing, his rifle steady in hand. Once, in a fierce battle, Daniel was ambushed and taken prisoner. He was brought to a Shawnee camp. For several months, Daniel lived among those who had killed his son, enduring captivity and the tribe's adoption rituals. But Daniel Boone never forgot who he was. He pretended to assimilate, waiting for the right moment. And one dark night, Daniel escaped from the camp, crossing the forest for many days and nights, returning to Boonesborough to warn the settlers of an impending attack. It was thanks to his timely return that the people of Boonesborough were prepared and managed to repel the fiercest attack yet. Standing on the rough wooden walls, gazing at the scorched fields after the battle, Daniel Boone thought to himself, "Kentucky is not just land. Kentucky is a song of courage, resilience, and loyalty." Daniel Boone had not only opened the way to Kentucky, he had opened the way for the spirit of America. Chapter 5: The Hero and the Years That Followed. After years of fierce struggle to defend Boonesborough, Daniel Boone became a living symbol of the pioneering spirit. His name spread far across the American colonies, like a torch lighting the way to the West. However, victory did not intoxicate Daniel. He understood that the real challenges still lay ahead. Kentucky, though won with blood, was not the paradise he had initially dreamed of. In the years that followed, Kentucky exploded with settlers. People poured in from the east in increasing numbers. New towns sprang up, fields of wheat stretched far, and sawmills rang with the sounds of hammers and axes. Rather than reveling in his fame, Daniel Boone threw himself into new expeditions. He led surveying parties across unfamiliar lands, mapping the area and creating pathways for the next wave of settlers. Yet Boone's life was never easy. Though he was a landbreaker, Daniel was not a skilled businessman. He trusted people too easily. The complex legalities often led him to lose his land to con men or opportunistic traders. At times, all the wealth Boone had fought for was reduced to nothing by a legal document he was unaware of. There were moments when he and his family had to leave the very land he had bled to win. But Daniel Boone never complained. Not a word of grievance passed his lips. He simply turned, took up his rifle, and once again set out in search of new lands. In 1799, at the age of 65, Daniel Boone and his family left Kentucky, crossing the Mississippi River into the Missouri Territory, which was still under Spanish control at the time. The Spanish government, admiring his fame and talents, granted him large tracts of land to settle. Once again, Daniel became a pioneer, creating some of the first communities in the new land. In Missouri, Boone lived out his final years simply, yet no less extraordinarily. He still hunted, still traversed the forests, still shared stories of the legendary Kentucky with the younger generations. Every time he told a tale, his eyes still shone like an undying flame. In Daniel Boone's heart, the spirit of exploration and freedom never died. In 1820, Daniel Boone passed away at the age of 85, after a life full of hardships but also brimming with pride. When he closed his eyes for the last time, the entire Missouri region mourned as if bidding farewell to a saint of the frontier. The ancient forests whispered in the wind, and the bubbling streams seemed to sing a farewell song. It is said that in his final days, Daniel Boone once said, "I only hope that when I depart, what remains behind are the roads I've opened, the fertile lands, and hearts that cherish freedom." And he did just that. Today, the image of Daniel Boone lives not only in old history books. He exists in every hill of Kentucky, every wild trail, every small town pioneered by courageous souls. He embodies the core values of America: freedom, courage, resilience, and the relentless desire to keep moving forward. If you believe that the spirit of exploration and courage, like Daniel Boone's, still lives in each of us, like the video, share it, and subscribe to the channel so we can keep that flame burning bright. The conclusion: the immortal legacy of Daniel Boone. Daniel Boone has passed away, but the footprints he left on American soil will never fade. He was not a glorious general on the battlefield, nor a distinguished politician in the halls of Parliament. Daniel Boone was simply a pioneer, a man who believed in the absolute freedom of the soul. A man who dared to step into the darkest depths of the wild and bring forth the light of civilization. And with those quiet steps, he expanded the borders of America. Today, as we walk through the deep green forests of Kentucky, as we listen to the babbling streams in Missouri, or gaze at the endless trails connecting small towns, we are walking in the footsteps of Daniel Boone. His name is given to mountains, schools, towns, and even highways that stretch across the eastern United States. But Boone's greatest legacy is not the places that bear his name. His greatest legacy is the pioneering spirit he ignited. It is the spirit that refuses to succumb to adversity. The spirit that dares to dream big dreams and step forward to make them real. The spirit of those who open new worlds with their hands and brave hearts. Daniel Boone was not just a man. He was a legend, an immortal torch for future generations, the pioneering Americans who continue to write their own stories. If the story of Daniel Boone has touched your heart, if that undying pioneering spirit has sparked a fire within you, please like the video, share it with your friends, and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss the next inspiring journey. Let's keep the spirit of exploration alive.